Rajni, what's wrong?
Tom, I have a script and I don't know what to do with it. Should I burn it? Feed it to my cat?
You need some writers group therapy.
Hello and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers. Are you ready for your session? The doctors are in. And if you like what you hear, send us some love on iTunes. Give us a 5-star rating. Yeah, 5 sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah, 5 would be great. Thank you.
And share it with your friends. So let's talk about something that's kind of a hot topic, and we're not talking about the weather here in LA. Diversity. Diversity in writing, diversity in casting, diversity in diversity.
So you obviously have a little more experience with this topic than I do. So as a writer who writes for yourself as an Asian American woman, what do you think about when you're writing, parts for yourself or when you're going out and auditioning for parts?
It's interesting because I think that a lot of roles written, whether it's stuff that's already been produced or stuff that's coming out now, many themes are universal. So, take a rom-com. It doesn't have to be, the klutzy white woman in the lead. It could be a klutzy black woman. It could be a klutzy Asian woman. It could be a klutzy Native American woman, whatever. It doesn't have to be the traditional white guy, white girl rom-com that we're used to seeing, and the best friend doesn't have to be a minority. That's partly casting,
Right.
but I think also writers, it starts with us. When we write roles for people, we need to realize you can have diverse leads and just do touches of culture without being heavy handed. Take, for example, Crazy Ex Girlfriend, where the lead guy is Filipino and there's touches of his culture, but they don't hit you over the head with the fact that he's Asian American.
Right. And well, for example, I know you're writing a rom-com that features a woman who runs a company, and that could be any gender or race doing that. It could be any, but you've written it, kind of with yourself in mind, and then the character and the company actually do have a cultural positioning to them, but it's not like you wrote it as a Asian story, so to speak.
Yeah, again, it's not heavy handed. There's little touches in there where they throw in a couple Tagalog terms. The company is related to immigration and her family's experience with immigration, but you could tweak it. You could tweak it. But again, things like love, loss, ambition, whatever, those are all universal themes. I understand now, obviously, in some films like 12 Years a Slave, that has to be black and white people. I get it. Hairspray, that has to be black and white people. I get it. But for the most part, I would say 90% of stories out there, it really is irrelevant. You wrote Reclamation, you specifically wanted an Asian family, but us being Asian wasn't necessarily relevant to the story.
No, it wasn't. We just knew you were going to play the lead, and while you can do different kinds of, methods to create a blended family or, having diversity within the family itself, we just decided to make the family Asian since you're Asian. So we found some really great Asian actors to play the parts, and everyone did a great job. And there's nothing culturally particular about the roles or the story.
I think the biggest thing we did was we called the grandmother Lola, which is what I call my grandmother.
Right.
And we had a nickname for the lead, which in my family, we love nicknames. I'm sure every family loves nicknames, but like, I don't know, Filipinos, to my knowledge, we love our nicknames. Everybody's got a nickname in our family. But that was it. We weren't really hitting over the head like, oh my gosh, and it's an Asian family, and it's a black recruiter, and it's a whatever. We weren't doing
Hmm.
that because it wasn't relevant.
Right, and that was the great thing about working with you on the project is you brought things to the story that had those slight cultural specificity, the accuracy, or trying to make it a little more authentic that I wouldn't even know. So, by having a diverse production team with producers and our director Allison, obviously is a woman, she brought unique things to the story that didn't put in the script because I didn't understand, the female character as well as she did. So that was also, I guess, another side of diversity that we addressed in that.
Now, obviously, that's diversity in casting. That's what you see visually. But
Hmm.
as writers, how do you think? Okay, so I mean, obviously, there's diversity like things like Blackish or Fresh Off the Boat that has to be written from a certain perspective. You have to have Black people or Asian people in the writer's room because they understand what it's like to grow up Asian or to grow up Black in a white suburb or whatever. But then you also just have general stories where it really doesn't matter. I love Superstore. I'd been following a lot of Superstore because I was writing spec scripts for it. Very diverse cast. And the diversity means nothing. It doesn't mean anything that you have a Latina lead. It doesn't mean anything that one of the guys is handicapped. It's just they're all people. So, as writers, how do we foster diversity starting with our writing, but not make it heavy handed or preachy or do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Right. Well, I think you touched on it with the Blackish and the Fresh Off the Boat. It's kind of like differentiating between a stereotype, which is what we don't want to do, and characters. So you can have unique characters without using their culture as a crutch or falling back on, stereotypes to say, oh, this person's this kind of character because they are, fall into that stereotype. It's about writing. I guess it's really about writing really interesting characters. So it doesn't matter your race or whatever, as long as you've got this kind of unique character that people can relate to because of their issues and their problems and their sense of humor and their, quirkiness or whatever it is. So really, I mean, that's what people, fall in love with on a show is the characters. So it doesn't always matter what race they are as long as you've written a good character and not, cheapened it with, stereotypes.
The stereotypes thing, actually, that's a very interesting point. I was talking to a lady, I went to a Writers Guild event recently, and we were talking about the reboot of Will and Grace. And I saw Will and Grace when it first came out. I haven't watched the reboot, but we were talking about because it was so cutting edge when it came out. And I'm not saying it's not funny now, but that also makes me wonder when you go into stereotype territory, the things that were cutting edge when they first came out might feel tired now, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because our perception of certain, you know, races, religions, stereotypes changes over time.
Mhm.
The things that were quote unquote funny when I was growing up in the '80s, that we saw on Saturday Night Live and on other sitcoms, you wouldn't even dare touch it now. It's because we've grown with our sensitivity and with our culture has changed to be more accepting and understanding, so that we're not you know going to go back to those sorts of you know I would say easy you know kind of ways to just kind of joke about things that were not probably not completely appropriate, or now they're definitely not appropriate. But back then, when you had a different audience, and you could get away with different things.
Yeah.
I mean, although I grew up watching things like Archie Bunker and Sanford and Son, so they had a lot of stereotypes in them, but they also did it in a way that they were trying to shed a light on discrimination and race and you know because a large white audience watching something like Sanford and Son and making it a hit show was kind of really groundbreaking at the time too. So
When did that come out? I remember, like, hearing about it vaguely, but I think it might have been
it was the late '70s, early '80s, I think.
okay. Yeah, I think I caught
Yeah,
it
it was like the Jeffersons. That was another one that really dealt with race, pretty strongly, very strongly actually, and growing, not growing pains, different strokes.
Yep,
You
I
know,
remember that
that
one.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
So all those things were they did it, and they shined a bright line on it because a bright light on it because they were trying to address those sorts of issues, and they did it very well. And that's why they were very, even across, a broad spectrum of the audience was very popular. Nowadays, though, do you feel like we write for niche markets, though? Are we segregating our audience? I just thought that up right now.
I mean, I think it's always kind of happened, and I think in a way to push a more diverse agenda, it has to happen. Like, you had the Cosby Show and you had the George Lopez Show. I'm trying to think of what else.
Well, now there's like superheroes even. There's this thing on the CW called Black Lightning. It's an all black
Oh,
superhero
yeah,
family.
it's doing great. Actually, the gentleman who's the lead used to teach acting classes at the church I used to go to. So he
Oh
was
wow.
very much giving back to the community. So we're all like, yeah, go Crest. But yeah, that's a very good example. But again, I mean, the themes are universal, so that's why it works.
Mhm.
And I mean, hey, with the advent of Black Panther, I mean, we can see that yes, minorities can totally carry a property and win big. So that's not
Mhm.
a hard sell. It makes me wonder too, like, how do you write stuff that would be timeless? Like, I think Black Panther is timeless. I think I could watch that 10 years from now and still like it. But like, for example, 16, I was like thinking of 16 Candles. Have you seen I've seen it. Well, have you seen it, first of all?
16 Candles?
Yeah.
Is that you mean the 1980s Molly Ringwald movie?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay, with the Long Duck Dong?
Mhm. Well, not only that, but there's even just like more subtle racist jokes in there. I don't know if you know it very well, but there's a thing in the beginning where Molly Ringwald's talking to her white best friend, and she says something like, "Oh, I always thought my 16th birthday would be amazing, and I'd meet this guy, and we'd do it on a cloud, and we wouldn't get herpes." And something about doing it in a car. She said something about like we do it in a Trans Am and we wouldn't get herpes or something. And her friend goes, what, I can't remember the exact line, but she asks about the color of the car and she goes black. And the friend's like, black guy? And she's like, no, pink guy, black Trans Am. I don't
Oh,
remember the
geez,
exact
yeah,
lead up, but it's basically like, oh my, like it's a horrifying thing. Like you would do it with a black guy. We've come a long way from the 80s. You know, I
yeah,
can't watch that movie without cringing at that line. It's
mhm.
horrifying. You know, and I remember watching it as a kid and being like, something doesn't seem right here, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. This is just I work at a tour company in Hollywood, and we have a video we play of Michael Bublé's Christmas special from just 3 years ago. And he actually makes there's a few jokes in it about like immigrants and Canadians and and it's it's not as funny as it used to be. People don't laugh at it. These are supposed to be like the big jokes that landed during this little bit they did. And it's really surprising how, just in just a few years how quickly things change.
Do you remember the exact wording? Like what the jokes
Well,
were?
Jay Leno asks Michael Bublé if he's from Canada, and Michael Bublé says he's from Vancouver. Yes, he's Canadian. And Jay Leno says something to the effect of Michael Bublé is hosting a Christmas special, so he's taking a job away from an American.
Mm,
So,
okay.
and yeah, and then there's another one where Michael Bublé talks about, oh, this was Justin Bieber's old house before his neighbors kicked him out. And he says he always thought that was racist because, and he makes some funny Canadian talk, verbiage, how the Canadians say, "Hey, yeah, you sure, yeah," and and it just doesn't land very funny. It's not actually,
Huh.
but he's Canadian, so I guess he can make Canadian jokes. But yeah, yeah. So and that was just a couple of years, 2, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Those things just fall flat now.
You do have to watch like what the climate is when you're writing something because the tones change and things that were like we were just talking about Will and Grace, things that were super funny and super cutting edge 5 years ago, 10 years ago might be really old and stale by now because we've moved on.
Hmm.
And it's partly cultural sensitivity and it's partly maybe being a little scared of offending people. So this might be a little controversial. I don't think you should be afraid of offending people in your writing, but as long as you do it in a way where you have done your research and you know that it's okay to say or do a certain thing, if that makes sense.
I would add as long as there's a purpose to it.
Yeah, don't just do it to be a jerk, but like I mean look at South Park, they offend everybody and everybody loves it. But every cultural group has their in jokes where it's like it's okay for them to say that offensively to each other, but it's not okay for an outsider to.
Hmm.
So things like that. You can totally do those things if you know, like if you have, like you said, a purpose and you know what it is and you're very clear on what you're doing it for.
But don't just do it to to show the audience that, oh, this is a character of this, nationality or this gender or this, sexual orientation. The days of the flaming, homosexual. I mean, you just don't see that. You see gayer characters on TV all the time now, but
Mhm.
they're not all. I mean, they're all just people working.
Yeah.
Police officers and doctors and lawyers and whoever else they are. They're just people, and we don't have to put an hammer it home that, oh yeah, look, they're a gay person because they talk this way, or an African American or Asian or whatever it is.
And, actually speaking of the sexuality thing, to me, that's really interesting because sometimes it's not even really relevant to the story. Unless it's about their sexuality and it plays into it somehow, like, I don't really care if it's a gay cop because what does that, like when they had, Solo came out and everyone's like, oh, Lando's pansexual. And I'm like, do I care? Does it affect the character in a big way? I don't know.
Yeah, and the freedom fighting robot.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, the jokes that she told about, like, "Oh, he wants me," or whatever are funny, but it didn't I don't know. I was just like, I don't really care. It doesn't add anything to me for the
No.
story. So
Yeah.
so what do you guys think? Where are you on the diversity debate? Let us know at Writers Group Therapy. You can find us on Twitter at WG Therapy. Our website is writersgrouptherapy.com, also our Facebook group. Join in the discussion. Let us know what you think. And if you like what you hear, subscribe and share it with your friends. We'll see you next week.